The sun had not yet risen over the dry, cracked fields of Dust Creek, but Mariah was already awake, crouched in the shadows behind the wooden fence of the abandoned orchard. Her hands were raw and blistered from digging through the dirt for the scattered remains of apples, the ones the wind had tossed from the trees last autumn. Her two daughters, little Clara and June, huddled behind her, shivering in threadbare dresses that had once belonged to her own mother. The air smelled faintly of earth and rot, but to Mariah, that scent was the only thing standing between her children and emptiness. She clutched a small basket to her chest, peering through the fence as the orchard owner's farmhouse came into view, a faint plume of smoke rising from the chimney. She knew she had no right to take from the orchard, even in such desperate times, but the girl's stomachs rumbled louder than her conscience. Every apple she could gather meant a night without tears, a day without fainting from hunger, and yet guilt clung to her like the dust that coated her shoes. The girls whispered, their tiny voices trembling with both excitement and fear. Clara, the eldest at 7, clutched her sister's hand and whispered, "Mama, what if they catch us?" Mariah smiled, a wan smile that barely touched her weary eyes. "Shh, my loves. We'll be gone before anyone notices. We just need enough to last the day." She crept forward, grabbing the bruised, worm-filled fruit, tossing it into the basket without a sound. Each rotten apple was a treasure, a morsel of hope. But deep down, she wondered how long she could keep up this charade. The orchard had become their lifeline, yet the life she was giving them was bitter and hollow, like the fruit in her hands. Her own childhood had been filled with hunger too, and she swore no one would starve while she still had breath in her body. A shadow passed over her, long and imposing, and Mariah froze, her heart slamming in her chest. A man rode past on a horse, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered cowboy, hat pulled low over his eyes. His gaze flicked toward her, but he said nothing. The girls buried their faces in Mariah's skirts, silent prayers escaping their lips. The man's horse kicked up a cloud of dust as he moved down the road, and Mariah exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and despair. Every day was a gamble, and the stakes were higher than ever. That morning, she returned home with her meager bounty, setting the basket carefully on the small wooden table. The girls circled it, their eyes bright with hope. They ate slowly, savoring each bitter bite, and Mariah kissed their foreheads, praying that tomorrow would bring more than scraps. By mid-morning, the sun scorched the land, and Mariah knew she had to find more food. She dressed the girls in layers of old shawls and took them to the town market, a dusty square filled with vendors selling dried meat, stale bread, and the occasional fresh fruit. She wandered through the stalls, trying to appear calm, her eyes darting from vendor to vendor. Each coin in her purse felt heavier than the last, weighed down by desperation. When she saw a pile of slightly bruised apples stacked on a stall, her heart ached. The price was higher than she could afford, and the vendor, a plump man with a sour face, shook his head when she asked for a discount. Walking away, Mariah's shoulders slumped. Her daughters tugged at her skirts, whining softly. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll find something, my loves." "We always do," but she knew the day was slipping away. Hunger gnawed at her belly and theirs, a cruel reminder that she had failed to provide enough for them. The desperation clawed at her, urging her toward theft again, toward the rotten apples that were perhaps their only salvation. She whispered to herself that it was for them, that it was for survival, but the lawless act pressed heavily on her soul. That evening, as she crept through the orchard once more, she felt the ground tremble beneath the hoofbeats of a horse. This time, it was the same Cowboy from that morning. He stopped a few yards away, watching her quietly, his eyes sharp but not unkind. Mariah froze, the basket slipping from her hands and rolling into the dust. The man dismounted and approached slowly, his boots crunching over the dry earth. "No need for that," he said, his voice low but firm. "I've seen your girls, and I've seen you. You don't have to steal to feed them." Mariah's breath caught in her throat. Who was this man, and how could he know the truth of her struggle? She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. The cowboy extended a rough hand toward her, a silent promise lingering in the dusty air. No one starves while I'm around." Mariah couldn't stop staring at him. There was something in his presence, something resolute and steady, that made the fear in her chest soften just a little. Her daughters peeked from behind her skirts, their eyes wide as they watched the stranger. The cowboy's gaze softened when he saw them, and he crouched down to their level. "You girls hungry?" he asked simply. Clara nodded, her small hands clutching June's. The man smiled faintly, reaching into a leather bag strapped to his horse and pulling out fresh apples, golden and firm. "Here," he said, handing them to the girls. Their eyes lit up as they took the fruit, tears mingling with smiles. Mariah felt her throat tighten. The gesture was small, but it carried more weight than she could describe. Kindness, security, and a glimpse of hope she hadn't felt in months. That night, Mariah sat by the fire with her daughters, their bellies full for the first time in days, and thought about the cowboy. She didn't know his name, but she knew his presence would change their lives. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a flicker of relief. Tomorrow, she vowed, she wouldn't have to steal. Tomorrow, perhaps, they could live without fear of hunger. Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the promise of something more than survival. And for the first time, Mariah dared to dream that they might even find happiness again. The next morning, Mariah awoke to the sound of a horse's hooves pounding, the dirt outside her small cabin. She rubbed her eyes and peeked through the window to see the cowboy standing at the door, holding a basket of fresh food. "Morning," he said simply. "I figured you could use some more help." Mariah's voice caught in her throat. She wanted to refuse, to insist on doing this herself, but her body ached from exhaustion, and her spirit had been bruised by too many days of struggle. The girls rushed to the door, squealing in delight as he handed them bread, milk, and fresh fruit. There was no judgment in his eyes, only quiet strength. He stayed for a moment watching her, then nodded. "I own a ranch just outside of town," he said. "There's plenty of work and plenty to eat. You don't have to scrape by on scraps anymore. Come with me." Mariah felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. The offer was so sudden, so generous, that she feared it was a dream. Yet in his gaze, she saw sincerity and promise. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the orchard, beyond hiding and scavenging. The ride to the ranch was long and dusty, but Mariah felt a sense of safety she hadn't known existed. Her daughters clung to her, their excitement palpable. The cowboy, whose name she learned was Colton, spoke little, but his presence spoke volumes. There were fences to mend, animals to feed, and chores that kept hands busy and hearts grounded. For Mariah, every task was a step toward reclaiming dignity, toward giving her daughters a life they didn't have to fight, tooth and nail to survive. The sun dipped low behind the mountains as they reached the ranch, painting the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. The girls ran ahead, their laughter ringing like music across the fields. Mariah followed slowly, her heart swelling with gratitude and disbelief. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of ranch life became the heartbeat of their new existence. Mariah learned to a future where her children could flourish, where kindness could outweigh cruelty, and where a simple cowboy's promise could change everything. And somewhere deep in the fields, under the vast expanse of sky, Mariah knew the words she had once whispered to herself had finally come true. No one starves again,